I knew something was wrong the moment my son asked me why a woman my age would need savings. He said it casually, as if he were talking about the weather, but the question landed like a stone in my chest. At 78, I've grown used to people assuming I'm fragile, slow, forgetful, but never useless, never unnecessary. And yet Daniel said it with the same tone he uses when explaining how smartphones work to me, as if he were doing me a favor. I didn't answer him right away. I simply looked at the steam curling up from my teacup, trying not to let my hands shake. I've always hated it when my hands shake in front of other people. It makes them think they can finish my sentences for me, or worse, make decisions on my behalf. Daniel stood in my kitchen, tapping his car keys on the counter, impatient the way only a grown man who has forgotten he was once someone's child can be. "Mom," he repeated, "I mean it. What are you saving money for? Emergencies? Future plans? Come on." He chuckled. "At your age?" My age, as if turning 78 had erased the decades before. The years of working in the school cafeteria, waking up at 4 in the morning. The nights I sat with his father through his last illness. The small, careful habits that let me build bit by bit what we never had in abundance. Daniel doesn't remember those things. Or maybe he remembers only the parts that suit him. I felt the old ache in my hips as I leaned back in my chair. The morning sun was coming through the window, hitting the dust motes just right, making the kitchen look warmer than I felt. I'd just finished straightening the table, the same table where Daniel once did his homework, where he spilled orange juice on his father's paperwork, where he painted a wooden duck blue when he was 6 because he said every duck deserved a proper color. Now he looked around this room as if it were a waiting room in a hospital, something temporary, something beneath him. "I just think it's silly," he continued, shrugging. "I mean, you don't travel, you don't shop, you don't go anywhere expensive. Why hang on to that money when it could actually help someone?" Someone? He meant himself. I recognized the tone instantly, that thin veneer of concern over the sharp smell of entitlement. I've smelled it before. The first time when he was 19 and needed help with rent for a place too big for him. Then at 30, when he wanted to borrow money for a business that never existed. Then last year when he said he'd take care of my online banking because it's confusing for older people. Older people. I suppose that included me. "Daniel," I said quietly, "my savings are not hurting anyone." He laughed again. "They're not helping either." There it was, the truth wrapped in a shiny little sentence. He looked at his watch, clearly ready to leave now that he'd delivered whatever message he'd rehearsed in the car. "You should think about it," he added lightly. "Money sitting around doesn't do any good, not at this stage of your life." My life. He spoke as though it were already ending, as though everything I might want now, quiet mornings, a roof repaired without asking him, the security of knowing I won't be a burden, was somehow unreasonable. He kissed the top of my head quickly, like someone signing for a package, and left. I listened to his car drive down the street, the sound fading fast, leaving the house too quiet, the air too still. I sat there a long time after he was gone. The tea had gone cold, but I held the cup anyway. I thought of George, my husband, who always said, "Margaret, don't let anyone decide your worth, not even family." It's a strange thing, remembering advice you spent years ignoring. But that morning, sitting alone in my sunlit kitchen with the echo of Daniel's question circling in my head, I felt, very distinctly, that something had shifted inside me. Not sharply, not angrily, just quietly, like a door closing at the end of a long hallway. And I knew this wasn't the last time he'd bring up my savings. It was only the beginning. The house always feels different the day after Daniel leaves. Not quieter. Quiet I can handle. It's something else. Something like the echo of a slammed door that keeps ringing long after the sound itself is gone. I moved through the morning slowly, the way I do when my joints are stiff, touching familiar objects just to remind myself they were mine. The radio, the old porcelain sugar bowl, George's faded apron hanging on the pantry door. Small things keep you tethered when people try to make you feel like you're floating away. I tried not to replay Daniel's question from yesterday, but it crept into every corner of my mind. Why would you need savings at your age? As though I'd been holding on to them for someone else. As though I didn't have the right to feel secure, even now. I made myself oatmeal and sat by the window. The maple tree outside was shedding leaves again, first yellow, then brown, drifting slowly in lazy spirals. I've always loved that tree. Daniel once climbed it so high that George had to coax him down with a candy bar. I can still hear his giggles when his father lifted him off the lowest branch. Funny how those memories feel more solid than the man he grew into. Around mid-morning, Chloe came by. I always know it's her by the soft knock. 3 quick taps, then one more, like she's checking the house is ready before she steps inside. She's 24, studying nursing, tired half the time, overwhelmed the other half, but she always finds a way to drop in on me, and she never asks for anything. "Grandma?" she called as she let herself in. "I brought you those muffins from the cafe you like." She walked into the kitchen with her hair pulled into a messy bun, cheeks flushed from the cold. When she hugged me, she didn't pull away quickly the way young people sometimes do, as though afraid old age might rub off on them. Chloe held on a moment longer, warm and grounding. "You okay?" she asked, setting the muffins down. "You look a little tired." "Tired is my natural state these days," I joked. But she knows me too well. Her eyes lingered on mine. "Did Dad bother you again?" she asked gently. I didn't answer right away. I didn't want her caught in the middle, and I certainly didn't want to poison her image of her own father. But children, the good ones, can sense when something is off. "He has opinions," I finally said. "More than I asked for." Chloe sighed. "He stresses about money, Grandma. He always has." Yes, money. His loyal companion, his lifelong adversary, and his favorite excuse. She changed the subject, telling me about her shift at the hospital, the elderly patient who insisted on calling her Sunbeam, the new coffee machine that burned everything except the actual coffee. I listened, grateful for the normalcy she carried with her, but underneath her chatter, the numbers in my head kept ticking. I'd checked my bank balance that morning, just to reassure myself, and I noticed something strange. A withdrawal for $220, then another for $78. I didn't recognize either. They weren't big enough to cause panic, not yet. But they weren't mine. I didn't mention it to Chloe. I didn't want her to worry. But I felt a slow unease settling in my chest, like cold water filling a basin, inch by inch. After she left, I walked around the house collecting my mail. Mostly catalogs and the community bulletin. Then, tucked between envelopes, a notice from the bank. A recent transaction was completed using your linked authorization. Linked authorization. That was the phrase from last year when Daniel convinced me to give him digital access in case something happens. I'd trusted him, foolishly. thinking he'd only use it for emergencies. The notice didn't specify the transaction. I'd have to check online or call someone. But the thought alone made me tired. The sun dipped low by late afternoon, stretching long shadows across the living room. I stood by the mantel and looked at the framed photographs. Daniel as a baby, Daniel at graduation, Daniel holding Chloe when she was just a swaddled bundle. It struck me then, quiet and sharp. My son had spent years walking into my life only when something needed fixing, or paying, or smoothing over. And I had let him, because motherhood teaches you to give without keeping score. But old age, real old age, teaches you to count the cost of every yes you ever said. By evening, the unease had grown into something clearer. Not fear, not anger. Awareness. Something was happening with my money. Something I hadn't agreed to. And Daniel's question, why do you need savings at your age, no longer sounded thoughtless. It sounded planned. And I knew then that the next days would reveal more than I was ready to face. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because of fear. Fear is something I learned to manage long ago. But because the house felt unsettled, as if it were holding its breath with me. I kept waking up, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the hallway clock, the soft shifting of the wind outside. Everything familiar, yet nothing comforting. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe the bank notice was just a routine alert. Maybe the small withdrawals were some subscription I'd forgotten I'd signed up for. The world has a way of sneaking payments out of you like that. So I made coffee, sat at the table, opened my old laptop, and signed into my account. The numbers didn't lie. 2 more withdrawals. Both approved using Daniel's linked access. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Not because of age, my eyesight is still decent when it wants to be, but because there is a particular heaviness that comes when you realize you handed someone the very tool they're using to cut into you. That was the moment the doorbell rang. Daniel never rings. He barges in, shouting, "Mom?" like a boy looking for juice in the fridge. So when I heard the chime, I knew he was already coming with a story prepared. "Hey," he said, stepping in with a smile too bright for morning. "Thought I'd stop by." He didn't even give me time to answer. He walked straight to the counter, grabbed a glass, filled it from the tap like he lived here, then leaned against the sink, studying me. "You look tired," he said. "Rough night?" "Fine enough," I replied. He made that face, half sympathy, half impatience. "Listen, about what I said yesterday, you know I didn't mean anything by it. I'm just trying to help you think practically." Practically. A charming word when used by someone who has never once been practical. "I'm 78, Daniel," I said quietly. "Not incompetent." He laughed too loudly. "I didn't say you were. But Mom, come on. What are you saving all that money for? A rainy day? It's practically pouring for me right now." There it was, not even dressed up. "For you," I repeated. "Well, for us," he corrected quickly. "For family. You always said family should help each other." Yes, I did say that. But somewhere along the way, help became a one-way street leading straight to him. He watched me carefully then, trying to read my silence. "I'm dealing with some tight spots right now," he added in a softer tone, the tone he used as a boy when he broke a neighbor's window. "A few overdrafts, some bills, nothing dramatic. I just need access to your account for a while, to straighten things out." I felt my stomach turn. "Access? You already have access." He froze. For a second, just a flicker, His eyes widened. Then he recovered. "Mom," he said slowly, "of course I used it. For small things. But you know I'd never take advantage of you." I wanted to believe him. God knows, mothers always want to. But the numbers on the screen were still fresh in my mind, and his voice, smooth, persuasive, only made them feel sharper. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you need to tell me exactly what you've been doing with my account." His expression tightened. Not guilt, but irritation. As though I were making his life harder by asking simple, necessary questions. "I'm doing what makes sense," he snapped. "Your money shouldn't just sit there. And really, Mom, you don't have the expenses you used to. You don't travel, you don't buy things, you don't—" "I don't matter enough," I finished for him. His mouth opened, closed. "That's not what I said." "No," I replied. "But it's what you meant." The kitchen felt smaller then, the air between us thicker, older. Daniel put the glass down, a little too firmly, and I saw something in his face I'd never wanted to see: ownership. The kind a man feels when he thinks he's entitled to something simply because he's decided it's his. "Look," he said finally, lowering his voice. "Just give me official permission. The bank keeps calling me, asking for confirmation on things. It would be easier if I could handle it myself. You don't need to stress about it." Easier. For him. "Let me think about it," I said. He exhaled sharply, annoyed. "Why think about it? It's common sense." No, I thought. Common sense is keeping your own money safe. Common sense is not mistaking love for obedience. But I didn't argue. Daniel left a few minutes later, already on his phone, already talking fast, already assuming I'd do what he wanted, as I always had. The house settled again after the door closed. Quiet. Still. I sat back down in front of my laptop, stared at the numbers one more time, and understood something with a clarity that made my hands go cold. Daniel wasn't asking for access. He was normalizing the fact that he'd already taken it. And that meant I needed to find out just how much he had done. I didn't wait long. The moment Daniel's car disappeared down the street, I put on my coat, grabbed my handbag, and stepped outside before I could talk myself out of it. At my age, hesitation is sometimes just another way of surrendering, and I've surrendered enough in this lifetime. The autumn air was sharp, almost metallic, cutting through the fog that had settled inside me these past days. The bank was only a 10-minute drive, but it felt longer. I caught myself gripping the steering wheel too hard, my knuckles pale. I kept hearing Daniel's words, "Let me handle it, Mom. It's easier." Easier for whom? The more I repeated the conversations in my head, the more I felt a quiet, rising certainty. Something had been happening behind my back for longer than I wanted to admit. The parking lot was nearly empty. Inside, the air smelled faintly of printer ink and the cheap citrus cleaner they've used for years. A young man at the reception desk looked up and offered a bright, polite smile. Too bright for how tired I felt. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" "I need to speak with a manager," I said. "Someone who can look into my recent account activity." He nodded and typed something quickly. "Of course. Let me see who's available." I sat in one of those stiff chairs lined along the wall, smoothing the hem of my coat. I watched the young man whisper something to a woman in a navy blazer. She looked over at me with a kind of cautious sympathy, the kind people reserve for the very old or the very confused. I straightened my back immediately. I may be old, but confusion was not the reason I was here. "Mrs. Hensley?" the woman called. I followed her into a small office. Sunlight filtered through blinds that hadn't been dusted properly. She introduced herself as Marissa Bolton, Senior Account Manager. Her voice was soft but clipped, trained to sound calm no matter the mess people brought into her office. "What can I do for you today?" I handed her the printed notice from the mail. "I received this yesterday. I didn't authorize these recent transactions." She read it carefully, then clicked through my account on her screen. Her eyebrows twitched just slightly, a movement she tried to hide, but I caught it. "Let me pull up the details," she murmured. I sat still, hands folded in my lap. A lifetime of self-control in one posture. After a moment, she turned the monitor slightly toward me. "There have been several small withdrawals over the past 2 weeks, and a number of scheduled transfers." "Scheduled?" My voice was thin, unfamiliar. "Yes, automatic payments. Some of them were added about 5 months ago." She hesitated. "They're labeled under your secondary authorized user." The room got smaller, the air thicker. "Who is that?" I asked, though I already knew. "Daniel Hensley," she said. "Your son." The words were gentle. The truth wasn't. I stared at the screen. Rows of payments, some small, some larger, all approved through Daniel's login. My name beside, amounts I had never seen, never agreed to. "Mrs. Hensley," Marissa said softly, "did you knowingly give him full authorization to manage your account?" I swallowed. The lie I'd told myself for months finally cracked. "I gave him access for emergencies," I whispered. "Not for this." She nodded, not judging. "It happens more often than you'd think," she said quietly. "Sometimes family members misunderstand the responsibility. Sometimes—" She paused. "Sometimes they take advantage." I closed my eyes. A slow, steady exhale. The kind that comes not from shock, but from recognition. I had known. Somewhere deep inside, I had known for a long time. "Can you tell me exactly what he has access to?" I asked. She clicked through more screens. "He can move funds between your accounts, approve transactions, modify automatic transfers, and—" her tone tightened. "He can add new payees." It felt like someone pressed a hand to my chest. Years of trust, handed over casually, now staring back at me in cold numbers and options he never should have had. "I want it all revoked," I said. "Every permission, every access, immediately." Marissa met my eyes. This time she didn't look at me like an elderly woman. She looked at me like someone reclaiming something precious. "Of course," she said. "I'll make the changes now." As she typed, I watched the screen, not the details, but the slow erasure of a door I never should have left open. When she finished, she printed some forms. "You'll need to sign these," she said. My hands didn't shake, not even a little. "Mrs. Hensley," she added carefully, "once these are processed, any transaction your son tries to make will be denied. His linked card, if he's using one, will stop working." I felt a deep, unexpected calm settle into me, like warm water after a cold day. "That's fine," I said. "Let it stop." When I walked out of the bank, the sun was slipping through the clouds, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool air. Not fear, not guilt. Just a quiet, steady truth. Daniel wasn't going to control my life anymore. And he was about to find out. Daniel showed up earlier than I expected. I had barely returned from the bank and taken off my coat when I heard his car pull up. Fast. Too fast for our quiet street. I stayed still for a moment, listening to the thud of his feet on the porch, the hurried jangle of the doorknob. He didn't even bother to knock. He simply pushed the door open and walked in like a man entering a room he owned. "Mom?" His voice echoed through the hallway, sharper than usual. "We need to talk." I stepped into the living room, holding on to the back of a chair, not because I needed support, but because it grounded me. He stood there with the same expression he wore as a teenager, caught doing something he shouldn't. Part indignation, part performance. "There's something wrong with my card," he said, as he held it up like evidence. "I tried to pay for gas and it got declined." "Declined, Mom? That's embarrassing." Embarrassing. That was his concern. "I know," I said quietly. His eyebrows shot up. "What do you mean you know?" "I went to the bank today." That stopped him. Not completely. Daniel doesn't stop quickly. But it slowed him enough for me to see the flicker of panic behind his irritation. "The bank?" he repeated, forcing a casual tone. "Why would you go there? I told you I could handle everything online." "I didn't ask you to handle everything." He exhaled sharply through his nose. "Mom, please, don't make this into something dramatic. I've been trying to help you. You gave me access because you were confused by all these digital systems." "I wasn't confused," I interrupted. "I trusted you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, bloated with every unspoken truth we'd avoided for years. He looked away first, pretending to straighten a picture frame on the wall, pretending he wasn't stalling. "What did they tell you?" he asked at last. "That you've been moving money," I said. "Setting up automatic transfers, approving withdrawals I didn't make." He flinched, but only slightly. "Those were small amounts. I told you, Mom, I've been tight lately, but it's temporary. I just needed a bit of help to keep things going." "You didn't ask." His jaw tightened. "I shouldn't have to ask. I'm your son." There it was, the belief he'd nurtured quietly for years, watered with my silence, my softness, my readiness to help. "I've supported you many times," I said gently. His head snapped back toward me. "Because I needed it, and you had the money just sitting there. You don't even use it." I felt a steadiness rise inside me, the kind that comes when something long neglected finally clicks into place. "Daniel," I said softly, "my money is not waiting for someone else to decide it's unnecessary." He laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Mom, honestly, you're overreacting. This isn't a crime. I was helping us both. You don't know what could happen in the future." "I know exactly what can happen," I replied. "It was happening already." He took a step toward me, hands raised as if he were talking a child out of a tantrum. "Okay, let's fix this. Just call the bank and tell them to reinstate my access. It's a misunderstanding." "No." He froze. "No?" he repeated as though the word was foreign to him. "No," I said again. "It's not a misunderstanding. I revoked your authorization." His face hardened, anger overtaking surprise. "Mom, you can't be serious. I need that access. Things are complicated right now." "So handle them," I said quietly. He stared at me, then really stared, trying to find the old softness he used to rely on, the softness he mistook for weakness. "Do you know how irresponsible this is?" he hissed. "You're making things harder for both of us." "For you," I corrected. "Not us." He shook his head, pacing, running his hand through his hair, the way he used to do when he was cornered. "I'm your son," he said again, as though repeating it made it more binding. "You owe me some trust." "I owe you love," I said. "And you have it. But trust is earned, not taken." He stopped pacing. His shoulders slumped for a second, and I saw something tired cross his face. Something almost human, almost boyish. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "So that's it?" he asked. You're cutting me off? I'm taking back what's mine. He opened his mouth, closed it, then scoffed. You know what? Fine. Do whatever you want. But don't call me when things fall apart. Don't expect me to fix your problems. I let the words settle. They sounded like punishment, but they were freedom. I won't, I said. He grabbed his jacket, muttered something under his breath, and slammed the door hard enough to rattle a picture on the wall. The house trembled for a moment. Then everything fell silent. I stood there alone in my living room, the quiet pulsing around me like a second heartbeat. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that surprised me. Not fear, not guilt, relief. The kind that comes from finally reclaiming the dignity you should never have given away. I thought the worst was over once Daniel stormed out, but the quiet that followed didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the pause before the next storm, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I tried to keep busy, washing the few dishes in the sink, folding the throw blanket on the sofa, watering the fern that refuses to die no matter how little sunlight it gets. But every small task brought me back to the same thought. I needed to know how deep his hands had already gone. By late afternoon, I found myself back in the car, driving toward the bank again. This time it wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, heavy, necessary. The sky had turned cloudy, the kind of flat gray that makes the whole town look like it's holding its breath. I pulled into the same parking lot, feeling the same cold knot in my stomach. But this time there was something else layered underneath. Resolve. When I entered the branch, the receptionist recognized me immediately and offered a sympathetic nod before even speaking. That alone told me something. People who work in banks see enough family conflict to recognize the shape of it before anyone says a word. Mrs. Hensley, he said softly. Ms. Bolton is available. I'll let her know you're here. I followed Marissa into her office again, and when she closed the door, she didn't ask if I was all right. She already knew I wasn't. How can I help you today? She asked. I want to understand everything, I said. Everything my son has been doing, every transfer, every permission, every change. She nodded with a seriousness that made me brace myself. Of course. Let's go through it together. She turned her monitor toward me again. My name was at the top of the screen, warm and familiar, and beneath it, cold lines of numbers stretching back months. Marissa pointed to the earliest unauthorized changes. These automatic transfers here, she said. They were added in early spring. Did you authorize them? No. And this recurring payment, she continued, goes to an account ending in 18 to 42. Does that belong to you? No. That account, she said carefully, is registered to your son. My breath left me in a slow, painful wave. I clutched the armrests of the chair, but not out of shock. It wasn't shock anymore. It was confirmation, heavy, undeniable. She clicked further. And these card withdrawals, she continued, were made with the secondary user card. That's your son as well. How long? I asked. 7 months, she said. 7 months. Nearly a year of quiet-taking, disguised as help. I sat still, staring at the rows of numbers. Not the money itself, that wasn't what hurt. It was the smallness of it, the way the transactions were spaced out. Not large enough to be noticed quickly, not small enough to be accidents. The perfect size for someone who knew I wouldn't look too closely, someone who believed I trusted him too much to question, someone who counted on my love being blind. Mrs. Hensley, Marissa said gently, you're not the first person to come in with a situation like this, and you won't be the last. It's not your fault. I nodded, but the words slid off me. How do I make sure he can never do this again? I asked quietly. First, she said, we've already removed his authorization. Second, we can disable any digital access he might have set up, including auto logins. Third, she hesitated, we recommend setting up a fraud alert on your account, not because you're at risk from strangers, but because it gives you extra notifications and oversight. Do it, I said. She typed quickly. And finally, she added, you can choose to restrict account access so that only in-person transactions are allowed unless you approve them verbally. I sat straighter. Yes, that too. She entered the final settings, then printed out a page of confirmations. Mrs. Hensley, she said, after these changes go through, any attempt your son makes to transfer money, log in, or use his linked card will be blocked. He will receive denial messages. I nodded slowly. Good. We sat quietly for a moment. The kind of quiet that follows truth. Heavy, but honest. There's one more thing, she said. Would you like us to monitor your account for unusual activity and notify you personally if anything happens? I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, I felt something warm push through the weight in my chest. Yes, I whispered. Please. She walked me to the door. We're here for you, she said. As I stepped outside, the clouds had parted slightly, letting in a thin line of pale sunlight across the pavement. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool air. I felt tired, but not in the way I usually do. This was a different kind of tired, one that comes after carrying something heavy for far too long. But beneath it, quiet and sure, was another feeling. Not quite strength yet. Something softer. Something like the first hint of steadiness after a long tremor. Daniel would soon realize his access was gone, and I knew him well enough to know what was coming next. He wasn't going to accept it quietly. Daniel didn't wait long. By the time evening settled over the house, the phone had already rung 7 times. I let each call go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear his voice yet. Not when I still felt the weight of those screenfuls of transactions in my chest. Not when I knew he'd try to twist my quiet into guilt. On the 8th call, I finally silenced the phone entirely. The house exhaled with me. I made myself a small supper, tea, a slice of toast, half an apple. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because my stomach was too tight for anything heavier. I sat at the table, watching the steam rise from the cup, remembering how George used to say that silence was where people's true selves came out. If that's true, Daniel's silence right now was filled with calculations, not reflection. Just after 9, the house lit up with headlights sweeping across my living room walls. The engine cut off. A car door slammed, hard, the way Daniel does when he's trying to rehearse anger before he enters a room. I didn't move. Let him knock. Let him wait. The knock came 3 times. Sharp, impatient. Adult on the outside, childish on the inside. Mom, he called, voice tight. Open the door. We need to talk. Need to talk. Not please. Not may I. Just need. As though urgency alone was permission. I opened the door only halfway. He pushed against it instinctively, expecting it to swing wide as usual. It didn't. His eyes scanned my face. There was frustration there, yes, but also something else. Fear disguised as righteous indignation. What did you do at the bank? He demanded. My card got declined 3 times today. 3. I know, I said calmly. Then why? I asked them to remove your access. He blinked, stunned for a split second, before anger surged up to fill the space where shame should have been. Are you out of your mind? He snapped. I need that access. I have payments set up. I have obligations. You set them up, I reminded him, without my approval. That's not the point, he burst out. I was helping you, managing things for you, making sure your money wasn't just collecting dust. I didn't ask for management. You needed it. There, again, that word, needed. As if my years, my wrinkles, my slower steps had stripped me of the right to decide for myself. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, Mom, you can't just take things away like this. I'm trying to keep everything under control, but you're making it harder. I held his gaze. For you, I said. Not for me. He scoffed, rubbing his forehead. You don't understand how bad things are for me right now. Then you should have told me, I said softly, instead of taking. He stopped moving. The way a person stops when they hear the truth spoken plainly and can't dodge it quickly enough. I didn't take anything you didn't already offer, he muttered. No, I said. You took what you assumed you deserved. For the first time, he fell silent. A quiet so thin and fragile I could hear his breathing. I'd said too much, or maybe finally just enough. Call the bank, he said stiffly. Tell them it was a mistake. Restore my access. No. He stared at me like he'd never heard the word before. What do you mean, no? I mean no, I repeated. The access is gone, and it isn't coming back. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle flicker. For a moment I thought he might shout or push the door or walk inside uninvited, but instead he exhaled through his teeth, sharp and bitter. You're making a huge mistake, he said. And when you screw up your finances, don't expect me to clean it up. I won't, I said simply. He hesitated a second longer, long enough for me to see the truth behind his anger. He wasn't afraid for me. He was afraid for himself. Without another word, he turned and walked away, shoulders stiff, movements jerky. His car engine growled, then roared off down the street, leaving the night still and heavy. I stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling the cool air on my face. My heart was beating fast, but steady. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't cried. I hadn't bent. For the first time in a long while, I had told my son no, and meant it. And that quiet, trembling victory settled over me like a warm shawl. The night after Daniel drove off, I didn't sleep much. Not because of fear. I've lived long enough to know fear burns out quickly. But because something inside me felt newly awake, as if a part of my mind that had been asleep for years finally sat up and opened its eyes. His words kept circling in my head. You're making a huge mistake. Don't expect me to clean up your mess. As though I were the one who'd relied on him. As though I had ever handed him a problem and said, fix it. In truth, I'd spent most of my adulthood stepping between him and his messes, shielding him from consequences he never learned to bear. By morning, my body felt heavy, but my thoughts were sharp. I made tea and sat by the window as the sun crawled over the rooftops. The street was quiet. Mrs. Doyle across the way sweeping her porch, the mailman making his slow walk down the block. Ordinary things. Comforting things. Then my phone buzzed. I'd silenced it the night before, but the vibration sounded like a trapped insect, frantic and unrelenting. I didn't look right away. I finished half my tea first. Only then did I check. 15 missed calls, 7 voicemails. A small cluster of text messages stacked one on top of another. The first message: "Mom, my card still isn't working. Call me." Then, "This is ridiculous. I need access now." Then, "Are you ignoring me?" And finally, "If you don't fix this by tonight, I'm done trying to be patient." I set the phone down. A soft, tired exhale left my chest. Later in the morning, Chloe stopped by. She has the kind of gentle presence that fills a room the moment she steps in. Quiet but warm, like sunlight slipping through curtains. She knocked softly and peeked inside. "Grandma, you awake?" "Barely," I said, smiling despite myself. She sat at the table, pulling off her gloves. "Dad's in a mood today. He's been calling everyone in the family. Aunt Stacy, Uncle Rob, even me." She rolled her eyes. "He's acting like the world ended." I didn't say anything. She studied my face. "What happened between you two?" she asked softly. I hesitated. Not because I wanted to hide the truth from her, but because I wasn't sure how much of it she could bear without feeling caught in the middle. She loved her father. She loved me. And children who love two people at odds often carry a weight they were never meant to hold. So I spoke gently. "Your father and I had a hard conversation," I said. "I needed to set a boundary. He didn't like it." Chloe's eyes softened with an understanding far beyond her years. "He's been stressed lately," she said. "That doesn't excuse anything. I'm just trying to understand." "I know," I said, reaching for her hand. "And you're good to try. But he crossed a line. I can't unsee that." Her fingers tightened around mine. "Grandma? Did he take money from you?" There are moments in life when someone looks at you with more clarity than you've shown yourself. Moments when a single question reveals how much someone already suspects. "Yes," I whispered. Chloe's face flushed with anger, real anger, the protective kind. "He shouldn't have done that. Not to you." "No," I said. "He shouldn't have." She took a breath, trying to steady herself. "Are you okay?" I looked at her then. Really looked. At the girl who came to check on me, who brought me muffins and stories from her life, who never asked for anything in return. "I will be," I said. She stayed for an hour, chatting about school and a new nurse on her floor who was convinced ghosts roamed the hospital at night. I laughed more than I expected to. When she left, the house felt less empty. But the moment the door clicked shut, my phone buzzed again, this time with a voicemail notification. Against my better judgment, I listened. Daniel's voice poured through the speaker, tight, frantic, edged with frustration. "Mom, this is getting out of hand. My account is frozen and the bank won't tell me anything. I need you to call them and tell them to reinstate me. I don't deserve this. I've been helping you for months. I've done everything for you, and this is how you repay me? Fix this. Today." I stopped the message before it ended. My hands weren't shaking, but my heart felt strangely steady, anchored. That was the moment I realized something important. Daniel wasn't calling because he cared about me. He was calling because he'd finally hit a wall he used to climb over using my money, a wall he could no longer breach. By late afternoon, the calls slowed. The texts dried up. Silence took their place. Heavy, brittle, waiting for the next crack. I sat at the kitchen table letting the quiet fill me. For decades, I'd lived in fear of disappointing my son. Now, for the first time, I wondered if he might have to learn what it feels like to disappoint himself. And I knew, deep down, that this was far from over. But something inside me had shifted. a small, steady flame where fear used to be. I wasn't going to bend. Not this time. Not ever again. The next morning came in softly, with a thin ribbon of sunlight slipping across my bedroom floor. I lay there for a while, listening to the small, familiar sounds of my house, the creak in the hallway, the distant hum of the heater, trying to settle the unease that had followed me into sleep. I wasn't afraid of Daniel's anger anymore. What lingered was something quieter, the grief that comes when you finally admit someone you love has been walking away from you for years. By the time I made it to the kitchen, I found Chloe's text waiting for me. "Morning, Grandma. Can I stop by later?" I typed back, "Yes, dear. Anytime." I made a pot of tea, the good kind I save for company, though I never tell anyone that. There's something about preparing for someone who genuinely wants to see you. It gives purpose to the hands, to the morning, to the soul. Chloe arrived just before noon, tapping lightly on the door the way she always does. When she stepped inside, her coat dusted with the last bits of the morning chill, she gave me a quick hug that lingered a little longer than usual. She must have sensed the heaviness still hanging around me. "I brought banana bread," she said, holding up a small paper bag. "Don't get excited I didn't bake it. I bought it from that bakery you love." "I'm excited anyway," I said, smiling. We sat at the table, slices of bread on mismatched plates, steam rising from our cups. Chloe watched me for a moment, her eyes soft but searching. "Dad came by my apartment last night," she said quietly. I set down my cup. "He was upset," she continued. "He said you were acting irrationally and that you'd cut him off financially." I let out a slow breath. "Did he tell you why?" She shook her head. "He said you were confused, that you didn't understand the systems, and he was only trying to help. But—" She hesitated, choosing her words. I didn't believe him. That startled me more than anything Daniel had done. "Why not?" I asked softly. Chloe looked at her hands, fingers curled around the warm mug. "Because I've been watching him for a long time, Grandma. He doesn't realize it, but I see the way he talks to people when he wants something. I see how everything is urgent, everything is dramatic, everything is someone else's fault." She paused. "And I've seen how he talks to you, always rushing you. Always explaining things like you're doing homework wrong." Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but with frustration. "I love him," she said. "He's my dad. But he uses that love like a shield sometimes. And I don't think he even knows he's doing it." I reached out and touched her hand. "You're a good daughter to him," I said. "Better than he realizes." She looked up then, her eyes bright with unshed emotion. "But you're my grandmother, and I'm not going to pretend he's right when he isn't." The room felt warmer after that. Not lighter, not easier, but warmer, like someone had opened a window just enough to let fresh air in. "Grandma," Chloe said gently, "what exactly happened, if you want to tell me?" So I did. I told her about the withdrawals, about the automatic transfers, about the access I'd granted him for emergencies that had never been emergencies at all. I told her about the bank visit and the screen filled with transactions I hadn't made, and then finally, about revoking his authorization. Chloe listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening, her hands gripping her mug. When I finished, she exhaled sharply. "He had no right," she said. "None." "I know," I said. She shook her head again, anger simmering under the surface. "And he's lucky you were the one who found it. Someone else might have pressed charges." I looked down at my hands. They seemed older that day, more fragile. but they didn't tremble. Not once. "I don't want to punish him," I said quietly. "I just want my life to be mine again." Chloe nodded slowly. "And you deserve that." For a moment we sat in silence, sipping tea, letting the truth settle between us. There was no need to fill the space with unnecessary words. Some conversations, once spoken, don't require decoration. After a while, she reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. Worn corners, soft edges. "I made something," she said shyly. "A sort of financial checklist. If you want, I can help you set up new passwords and alerts, just so you feel safer." My throat tightened. Not with sadness. No, with something gentler. Gratitude, maybe. The simple, steady kind. "Thank you," I whispered. She spent the next hour helping me write down account numbers, new logins, instructions for detecting unusual activity. She explained everything slowly, never once assuming I wouldn't understand. She respected me in a way Daniel no longer knew how to. As she packed her things to leave, she paused at the doorway. "Grandma, I'm here. Whatever happens next with Dad, you're not alone in it." I smiled softly. "I know." After she left, the house didn't feel empty the way it usually does. It felt held, supported, like someone had gently set something back in its rightful place. Daniel's world was beginning to unravel, and I knew he'd be back soon, louder, angrier, more desperate. But now I had something I didn't have before. I had truth. I had clarity. And I had someone beside me. Someone who loved without taking. The next confrontation was coming, but I wouldn't be facing it alone. Daniel returned on a Wednesday, just after sunset. I'd felt him coming long before his car turned onto my street. Not in any mystical way, but in the quiet dread that settles in your bones when you know a confrontation has been simmering, waiting for the right temperature to boil. I was in the living room, folding the same blanket I'd folded twice already, when headlights cut across my window. I didn't move. I simply placed the blanket on the armchair and rested my hands on its soft edge, steadying myself. His knock was not a knock. It was a demand. 3 hard strikes, a pause, then 2 more. "Mom," he called, voice tight. "Open the door." I opened it only part way, just enough to see him clearly. His face was unshaven, his hair disheveled, his eyes carrying the frantic shine of a man whose plans had collapsed faster than he could rebuild them. "We need to talk," he said, pushing the door farther. This time, I held firm, and for a split second he looked startled, as though the door had betrayed him. "Come in," I said quietly. "But we're talking in the living room." "Nowhere else." He stepped inside, pacing immediately, rubbing the back of his neck like he used to when he was a boy, caught lying about a broken window. Only this time, the stakes were higher, and the lies were deeper. "You've made things really difficult for me," he said. "Really difficult." I sat in my chair, the one by the window. He stayed standing, looming the way people do when they're trying to tilt the power their way. "Tell me what's going on," he said. "Why are you doing this? Why would you revoke my access without warning?" "You know why," I answered. He stopped pacing. "No, I don't. I really don't." I looked at him, at the man I raised, at the boy still living somewhere inside the shell of an adult. "You were taking money, Daniel, setting up transfers. I trusted you, and you took advantage of it." "I didn't take advantage," he snapped. "I borrowed. Borrowing isn't stealing." "You didn't tell me," I said. "Borrowing without asking is not borrowing." His jaw tightened. You're blowing this out of proportion. I've been under pressure. Bills, debt collectors. You don't understand how hard things have been for me. I felt a surprising calm wash over me. Then you should have come to me, honestly. Honestly? He barked. You would have said no. So, you decided to take instead. He flinched, not because he disagreed, but because the truth landed too close to home. Mom, listen, he said, lowering his voice. I need that access. I need it. Without it, everything's going to fall apart. Then you need to fix those things yourself, I replied softly. He stared at me, eyes narrowing. So that's it? You're choosing money over your own son? No, I said gently. I'm choosing self-respect over being used. His mouth opened, then closed again, like he couldn't quite find the angle from which he usually wins a conversation. You're acting irrational, he muttered. You're old, Mom. You shouldn't be dealing with this alone. I'm not alone. That made him pause. What does that mean? It means I have support, I said simply, and I'm not helpless. He scoffed. Oh, Chloe. Let me guess. She's the one filling your head with nonsense. My spine straightened. Chloe listens. She helps. She respects me. He waved that off with a bitter laugh. Well, she's young. She doesn't understand responsibility yet. No, Daniel, I said softly. She understands responsibility better than you do. His face tightened, wounded for a flash, then quickly covered with anger. I can't believe this, he said, grabbing his jacket. You're choosing sides in your own family. I'm choosing boundaries, I corrected. He moved toward the door, then turned back, eyes shining with frustration. You're making a mistake, and when you realize it, don't expect me to come running. I met his gaze steadily. I won't. For a moment, just a moment, his expression cracked, revealing something raw beneath the anger. Hurt, pride, fear. But then it sealed again, hardened into something unyielding. He opened the door, stepped out, and slammed it behind him. The sound echoed through the house, vibrating in the walls, then fading slowly into the quiet. I sat alone for a long minute, listening to my own breathing. The moment held weight, yes, but also a strange, deep stillness. For the first time in years, I had stood firm, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of truth. And the truth, I was learning, has a way of giving back pieces of yourself you thought you'd lost forever. For 2 days after Daniel stormed out, the house carried his anger like smoke, thin but lingering, clinging to corners, settling into the quiet. I tried to busy myself with small chores, but my hands kept slowing, my thoughts drifting back to that look in his eyes before he left. It wasn't just anger. It was disbelief. As if he'd encountered a version of me he didn't recognize, one that had stopped bending. On the third evening, just as the sky turned that bruised shade of blue before darkness fully settles, he returned. No car this time. He walked. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, a slow, dragging shuffle up the path. Not the storming gait of a man ready for battle, but the heavy tread of someone who has run out of rehearsed speeches. I opened the door before he could knock. He looked different. Tired. The kind of tired that begins in the eyes and trickles down into the shoulders. His hair was uncombed, and his jacket hung crooked on one side, as if he'd thrown it on without looking. "Mom," he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" "Yes," I answered, stepping aside. "Come in." He followed me to the living room, but didn't sit. He stood near the mantel, staring at the framed photos. Him as a child, him at graduation, him holding newborn Chloe. His fingers tapped against his thigh, small, restless movements he couldn't contain. "I've had a rough couple days," he said. "You probably don't care, but I'm telling you anyway." I folded my hands in my lap. "I do care, but caring doesn't mean I agree with what you did." He let out a long breath and rubbed his forehead, pacing a short line across the rug. "You blindsided me, just cut me off without warning." "I warned you years ago," I said gently, "every time I asked what you were spending on. Every time I asked if you were planning to pay back what you borrowed. You didn't hear the warning because you weren't listening." He stopped pacing. His face tightened, not in anger, but in something closer to sorrow. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." "I know," I said. He blinked, surprised by the softness. Maybe he expected me to lash out, but that wasn't what this moment called for. He continued, "I didn't know what else to do. I kept thinking I'd catch up eventually, that I'd fix things. And then more things broke, and more bills came, and—" His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't want to come to you again asking for help. I knew what you'd think of me." I looked at him quietly. There was no triumph in seeing him like this, only a deep, familiar ache. The ache of a mother who has loved someone so much she forgot to let him fall when he needed the lesson. "Daniel," I said softly, "you didn't come to me. You went around me." He sank into the armchair across from me, elbows on his knees. "I know. But Mom, I wasn't stealing. I used the card because I truly believed it was okay. You weren't using the money. I thought we were being practical." "We?" I asked gently. "Or you?" He looked away. "I didn't see it that way," he whispered. I thought you'd want to help." "I did want to help," I said. "But wanting to help is not the same as being taken for granted." A quiet settled between us, thick but not hostile. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I'm drowning," he said, barely audible. "I've made a mess of my finances. I know it. I'm not proud of it. But when that card stopped working, I panicked." He glanced up at me, eyes red, tired. "And then I got angry, because I felt alone." His voice shook on the last word. "Daniel," I said, leaning forward, "you are not alone. But you cannot use me as a life jacket every time you refuse to swim." He swallowed hard. "So what now? Are you cutting me out for good?" "No," I said. "I'm setting boundaries. Hard ones. Ones I should have set years ago." He nodded slowly, as though the idea frightened him, but also steadied him. "I'm not giving you access again," I said. "That part is final." He didn't protest this time. His shoulders simply sagged, as though he had been expecting or needing those words. "But," I continued, "I will help you find someone, an advisor, a counselor, who can help you sort out your finances. A professional, not me." He stared at me a long moment, breathing unevenly. "That's fair," he said at last. "More fair than I deserve." Another silence, but this one felt different. Less like smoke, more like dust settling. "Mom?" he said suddenly, voice small. "Yes?" "I'm sorry." The words were quiet, imperfect, but real. I felt them like a warm weight in my chest, unexpected and heavy. "I know," I said, "and I hear you." He wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed. I can't believe how badly I handled things." "You can learn," I said. "If you choose to." He stood slowly, as though the room itself resisted letting him leave. "I'll try," he said. "I don't know how yet, but I'll try. That's all I can ask." He nodded, walked to the door, paused, then turned back as though wanting to say more. But whatever words he had didn't make it past his lips. He stepped outside, didn't slam the door, didn't drive off like thunder. Just walked into the quiet night. I sat there for a long while, hands folded, heart steady. There was no victory in the room, only truth. And sometimes, truth is the only thing strong enough to carry both love and disappointment without collapsing. The morning after Daniel's apology felt strangely hollow. Not wrong, just unsteady. Like the quiet that follows a storm, when the sky hasn't yet decided whether to clear or break open again. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, hands wrapped around the warm mug, letting the steam soften the ache in my fingers. Daniel's words from the night before lingered in my head. I'm drowning. I'm sorry. I'll try. They mattered. Of course they did. A mother's heart doesn't stop working just because it's been bruised. But apologies don't undo actions. And regret doesn't restore trust. I heard George's voice in my memory. Low, steady, certain. Take care of your future, Margaret. Don't leave it in anyone's hands but your own. For years I'd ignored that warning, telling myself that family meant shared burdens. But now I understood something I should have faced long ago. Shared burdens only work when everyone carries their part. By noon, I had made my decision, not out of punishment, out of clarity. I called the law office Chloe recommended, a small firm with warm lighting and old carpet that smelled faintly of lemon polish. The receptionist placed her hand over the phone and whispered to a colleague, then smiled at me gently as she led me to a quiet conference room. A few minutes later, Mr. Harding entered. A man in his 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of measured calm you only find in people who've spent decades witnessing the complications of other families. Mrs. Hensley, he said, shaking my hand. Chloe spoke highly of you, said you'd be coming. His tone was respectful, not patronizing, a relief in itself. I need to update my will, I said, and create something protective. A trust, perhaps, one that can't be tampered with. He nodded slowly. Of course. Let's talk about what you want and what you don't. We began with simple questions. My assets, my accounts, the house, the small life insurance policy George had left me. Then he asked about beneficiaries. My breath caught slightly, but I didn't hesitate. I want my granddaughter Chloe to be the primary beneficiary, I said. She's the one who has shown care, consistency, respect. And your son? He asked gently. I folded my hands. I don't want him disinherited out of spite, but I want him removed from anything that gives him control. No access, no management rights, nothing he can adjust or influence. Mr. Harding nodded, as though he'd seen this shape of sorrow many times before. We can create a trust in Chloe's name, he said, with a third-party trustee to manage it until she reaches a certain age, or indefinitely, if you prefer. No, I said. She doesn't need supervision. She needs protection from the pressure that might come from her father. He made a note. Understood. We went through the documents piece by piece. He explained everything plainly, never rushing, never assuming I couldn't follow. I initialed here, signed there, reviewed clauses that safeguarded against future manipulations. It felt both heavy and liberating, the weight of responsibility mixed with the quiet dignity of reclaiming what was mine. At one point, Mr. Harding paused. Mrs. Hensley, he said softly, do you want to explain why you're making these changes? You don't have to, but sometimes it helps clarify your intentions. I looked out the window behind him. The sky was a muted gray, the kind that hovers between calm and rain. My son is struggling, I said. I'm not blind to that, but struggle doesn't give him the right to compromise my safety or my future. I love him, but love doesn't mean surrender. He nodded. It means boundaries. Yes, I whispered. It does. When all the paperwork was done, I placed my signature on the final page. My hand didn't shake. Not once. As Mr. Harding gathered the documents, he said, "This will protect you, Mrs. Hensley, and it will protect your granddaughter. It's a wise decision." Wise. A word I hadn't applied to myself in years. It felt good. When I stepped outside, the clouds had finally broken, revealing a pale stretch of late afternoon sun. The light fell across my hands, warm and gentle. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting that warmth sink into me. Daniel would find out eventually, and it would hurt him. But sometimes love means allowing a person to feel the weight of the world they created, so they finally learn to carry it themselves. I walked to my car slowly, the papers in my bag rustling softly with each step. They didn't feel like weapons or shields. They felt like freedom, like the quiet reclaiming of a life I had almost forgotten was still mine. Daniel found out sooner than I expected. Not because the lawyer contacted him, Mr. Harding was far too professional for that, but because Daniel tried, once again, to use the access he no longer had. People reveal themselves in the moments when the world tells them no. And Daniel had never been good at hearing that word. It was late afternoon when he appeared at my house. This time, he didn't knock. He stood on the porch, breathing hard, shoulders high with tension, as if holding himself together took more strength than he wanted to admit. I opened the door before he raised his hand. "Mom," he said sharply, "we need to talk. Now." His voice wasn't angry. Not exactly. It was brittle, like glass that hadn't shattered yet but wanted to. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside, walking straight to the living room, then stopped in the center of the rug, turning to face me with an expression that carried accusation, disbelief, and something deeper, hurt that had festered into resentment. "I talked to the bank again," he said, "and I know you changed your will." I felt a small, quiet ache, not regret, just the sorrow of confirmation. "I did," I said. "I updated everything." His mouth twisted. "To what? To leave everything to Chloe? To cut me out completely?" I shook my head. "Not completely, just responsibly." He laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "Responsibly? That's what you call this?" "Yes," I said softly. "That's exactly what I call it." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "So that's it? After everything I've done for you?" I looked at him. Really looked. At the man he'd become. At the years of distance he'd allowed to grow between us. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what have you done for me?" He blinked, stunned by the question. Mom, I've helped you. I've managed your accounts, your bills. You used my money without asking," I corrected gently. "You pressured me. You took advantage of my trust. That isn't helping." His face reddened. "I was doing the best I could." "I know," I said, "but your best doesn't give you permission to harm me in the process." Silence filled the room like a cold draft. He looked around, at the family photos, the framed cross-stitch I made in my 30s, the fading curtains. This had been his home once. Now it seemed to strike him that he was a visitor, one who had overstayed his welcome. "So that's it?" he said finally. "I lose everything because I made mistakes?" "You don't lose everything. I said. You lose control. That's all. He stared at me, breathing hard through his nose. And Chloe gets it instead. She gets my trust, I said, because she's earned it. His jaw tightened. She turned you against me. No, I said firmly. You did that yourself. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, lost, furious, frightened, but only for a moment. Then the hardness returned. I hope you're happy, he said. Really. I hope this gives you whatever you think you're gaining. It gives me peace, I whispered. He swallowed, throat working. Then, good for you, I guess. He turned toward the door, paused, then looked back, just once. You always loved her more, he said quietly. No, I replied. I loved you both, but only one of you remembered how to love me back. His face tightened in pain, but he didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't beg. He simply walked out, closing the door gently behind him, something he hadn't done in years. I stood in the quiet house, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me. Not victory, not relief, just truth. And truth, I've learned, is rarely gentle, but it is always necessary. The house felt different after Daniel left that last time. Not lighter, not exactly. More like a room after a long argument, when the air is still heavy, but something inside it has shifted into place. I walked slowly through each room that evening, touching the edges of furniture the way you steady yourself after standing too quickly. The sun was sinking low, tinting the walls with that peculiar late-day gold that makes everything look softer than it truly is. I paused by the mantel, letting my fingers drift over the frame of George's photograph. His quiet smile, his steady eyes. How many times had I leaned on the memory of him just to get through another day? You'd tell me I did the right thing, I whispered. But I wish you were here to say it out loud. The house didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Some truths are older than sound. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the kitchen window. Outside, the street lamps were flickering on one by one. Mrs. Doyle was dragging her trash bin to the curb, her small body bundled in a sweater 2 sizes too big. A stray cat darted across the sidewalk. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice, then went quiet. Ordinary life. Mine, still mine. That realization settled into me slowly, like warmth seeping into cold hands. I sat down, cradling the tea, letting the quiet stretch without rushing to fill it. Silence used to frighten me. After George died, after the children moved out, after the years thinned into something quieter than I was prepared for. But lately, I've begun to understand silence differently. It's not emptiness. It's clarity. It leaves space for you to hear yourself again. And I heard myself now, more clearly than I had in years. I thought about Daniel, not angrily, not bitterly, just honestly. The boy he'd been, the man he became, the choices he made, the ways I'd allowed my love for him to blur the line between support and sacrifice. Loving your children doesn't mean losing yourself to them. It took me 78 years to learn that. I remembered the years after George passed, the legal papers, the unpaid bills, the fear of being alone with responsibilities I didn't understand. I had learned everything slowly, step by step, telling myself I had time. And yet, I still handed so much over to Daniel in the name of convenience, in the name of trust, in the name of believing he knew better because he was younger. Age teaches you one astonishing truth. Sometimes the younger ones know less than they think, and sometimes the older ones know more than they admit. I took another sip of tea. It had cooled, but I didn't mind. The warmth was inside me now, not in the cup. The sky outside deepened into violet. I watched a pair of teenagers walk down the sidewalk, their laughter carrying lightly across the street. Youth is such a noisy thing. It fills the air without effort. Age is different. It fills the soul instead. More quietly, more deliberately. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Chloe. Thinking of you. Hope you're resting. Love you. A simple sentence. But it reached places inside me. Daniel's words hadn't touched in years. I typed back, I'm all right, dear. Love you too. Afterward, I sat with the stillness again, letting the events of the past weeks settle into something that felt like understanding. I wasn't angry at Daniel anymore. I wasn't even hurt. Not in the way I'd been before. What I felt was a kind of soft, tired acceptance. You cannot make someone respectful by giving them everything. Sometimes you only teach them to expect more. And I had finally stopped teaching that lesson. The clock in the hallway chimed, a low, steady note. I rose slowly, joints protesting, but spirit calm. As I made my way to the bedroom, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, a face lined with time, hair silvered into its own kind of honesty, eyes that carried stories heavier than they once did. But there was dignity there, and peace. The kind that comes not from winning, but from ceasing to surrender. I turned off the lights, letting the darkness settle gently over the house, and climbed into bed. Outside, the wind rustled the last leaves on the maple tree, a soft whispering sound that reminded me of George's steady breathing beside me all those years ago. I closed my eyes and let the quiet hold me, not as loneliness, but as presence, my own. Tomorrow would come with whatever it carried. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. I woke before sunrise, the room still wrapped in that pale early morning blue I've always loved. There's something honest about that hour. Nothing hides in it. Not disappointment, not grief, not quiet victories. I sat up slowly, letting my feet find the floor. My bones ached the way old bones do, but the heaviness I'd carried for months was gone. The house greeted me the same way it always had, softly, without demands. I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and let the familiar hum settle into my chest. Outside, the frost on the window pane was beginning to melt, thin lines of water tracing paths downward, like the world thawing one delicate inch at a time. I thought of Daniel. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just with a deep, steady understanding. People show you who they are over time. And sometimes the hardest part of love is accepting the version of them that stands in front of you, not the one you held on to in memory. But love isn't slavery, and boundaries are not betrayals. I took my tea to the little table by the window. The maple tree stood bare now, its branches etched against the brightening sky. I rested my palms around the cup and let the warmth seep into me. A soft knock broke the quiet. Not urgent, not demanding, just gentle. When I opened the door, Chloe stood there with a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, cheeks pink from the cold. She smiled the way young people smile when they genuinely want to be near you. "Good morning, Grandma," she said. "I brought you breakfast. And I wanted to check on you." Her presence filled the house like a warm draft. We sat in the living room, eating the pastries she'd brought, talking about her night shift. about the elderly woman who insisted on giving nurses candy she wasn't supposed to have, about a doctor who sang off key while stitching a patient. Normal life, real life, the kind that asks nothing of you but honesty. At one point, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Are you really okay?" she asked softly. I looked into her eyes, clear, kind, unburdened by expectation. "I am," I said, "for the first time in a long while." She smiled, and something inside me settled with the simplicity of that moment. After she left for work, the house didn't feel empty. It felt witnessed, as if someone had walked through my loneliness and left a little light behind. The rest of the day moved gently. I watered the plants. I organized the drawer by the stove that always seems to fill with things I don't remember placing there. I sat on the porch for a while, breathing in the cool air, watching a neighbor teach her granddaughter how to ride a bicycle. The little girl wobbled and nearly tipped over, but the grandmother held the seat just long enough for her to find her balance. Balance. Maybe that's all I had been searching for. I thought about the trust, the updated will, the hours in the lawyer's office. I thought about Daniel's hurt, his anger, his quiet apology, and I felt no guilt, only a slow, steady peace. You can love someone deeply and still protect yourself from them. You can forgive someone and still close the door they kept walking through uninvited. And you can reclaim your life at any age, 78, 80, beyond, without asking permission. When dusk arrived, soft and lavender-colored, I stepped outside one last time. The street was calm, neighbors settling in for the night. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and breathed in the quiet. My life was still mine. My story was still mine. And that dignity, the quiet, unwavering kind, was something no one could take again. Inside, I turned off the lights and let the darkness rest gently around me. Not a threat, not a void, just a companion to the truth I had finally allowed myself to speak. We grow older, we grow quieter, but if we choose, we also grow braver. And sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do, at 78 or any age, is simply say, "Enough. This is my life, and I am keeping it." So if you're reading this, my dear, woman to woman, age to age, heart to heart, let me leave you with this. Protect your peace. Protect your dignity. And never let anyone, not even your own blood, convince you that your life stops belonging to you. If this story touched something in you, stay a while. Share it. Comment. Follow. Let your voice join mine, quiet but unshakable.